The part of Indiana Jones that almost went wrong was never meant to be seen. It has been hidden for decades, and the controversial video shows Indy doing something that can't be done. Brad Pitt even begged Spielberg to cut it. The truth comes out now, after 40 years. Why fans still want to know what really happened on that Nazi submarine, and how a $250,000 mistake led to the biggest plot hole in movie history. George Lucas came up with the idea for Indiana Jones because he loved adventure stories as a child. He watched old adventure shows from the 1930s and 1940s as a child. In them, brave heroes went to faraway places, avoided traps, and fought bad guys. He wanted to bring that same thrill to people today. He thought of a figure who was like James Bond and a classic explorer. This person would be rough and tough, but also smart and resourceful. He got a lot of ideas from Scrooge McDuck. The Uncle Scrooge comics, in which the duck looked for wealth in old ruins, had a big impact on the lost area. There was even a scene in one story that was just like Indy's cool hero swap. But Indiana Jones wasn't just based on a story. Lucas also looked at explorers from real life. Roy Chapman Andrews, an adventurer from the 1920s who looked for dinosaur bones in the Gobi Desert, was one of the most important people in his life. He had a hat on and a gun in his hand. He looked exactly like the hero Lucas wanted to make. What about the name? And that was said by Lucas's dog, Indiana. It was the same Baka in Star Wars. The character's name was Indiana Smith at first, but Spielberg thought it sounded silly. In 1977, they were in Hawaii when Lucas casually brought up Jones. Instead, Spielberg agreed right away. In The Last Crusade, when Indy's dad says, "We named the dog Indiana," they make a joke about it. Spielberg has always wished he could direct a James Bond movie. People who put together the show said he was too young both times he tried in 1977. He was mad, and while they were on vacation, he told Lucas about it. Lucas smiled and said, "I've got something better than Bond." Spielberg heard about his plan for the adventures of Indiana Smith. Spielberg liked it a lot and called it James Bond without everything. Their deal with Paramount gave Lucas full power over any follow-ups, and Spielberg promised to keep the cost low. Spielberg cut down on the length of Raiders to save money. Only 73 days instead of the 85 days that were planned. He used sets from Star Wars again, shot whole scenes in one day, and had Indy wear the same outfit for most of the movie so they wouldn't have to make new ones. Irene Smith was given the name for a while, but Spielberg never liked it. Early drafts of the scripts made Indy look like a rough explorer who sometimes stole treasures for himself. This was based on real archaeologists like Hiram Bingham, who found Machu Picchu. While taking its things, he thought that made Indiana Jones look too self-centered, though. He wanted the person to be interested in history and not just want to get rich. Lucas liked the idea of Indy as a shooter who shoots first. In Spielberg's mind, he should have been more of a hero. They got things right. Even though Indy was mean, he always did the right thing. After a lot of discussion, the name was finally changed to Jones. After the fact, Lucas joked, "I didn't care if we called him Peanut Butter Sandwich. I just wanted to make the movie." It was a mess to find actors to play Indiana Jones. Schauberg first chose Tom Selleck, who played Magnum. P.I. Selleck even tried on the hat and jacket for the part. But CBS wouldn't let him out of his TV deal at the last minute, so he had to drop out. Lucas was in a lot of pain and called the network. Begged them to let Selleck go, but they wouldn't. They needed a new lead because the movie was due in 3 weeks. Harrison Ford wasn't chosen because he had already played Han Solo. Lucas was afraid that people would always think of him when they think of Star Wars, but Spielberg pushed for him. Ford only got $1 million, which is much less than what Selleck would have made. Also, he saved money on one of the most famous scenes in movie history. Because he had food sickness, Indy wasn't able to fight the swordsman for very long during the Cairo sword fight. He just pulled out his gun and shot the guy instead. Spielberg liked it so much that he kept it in the final movie. This saved the budget $150,000. Another big problem was the money. Paramount didn't want to spend $20 million on an action movie that might not do well. The head of the company, Michael Eisner, said it was a B movie with a movie costs. In order for the deal to go through, Lucas agreed to hire Spielberg, who had just finished making the expensive disaster 1941 and promised to be extra careful with the budget. To make sure they didn't waste time or money, he planned out every scene. Even with all of these problems, Raiders of the Lost Ark made $389 million around the world, making it the biggest hit of 1981. Everyone but Lucas and Spielberg made more than $50 million. Paramount, on the other hand, only made 12%. It showed that big adventure movies don't need huge costs to be successful. After the fact, Spielberg joked, "We made a $40 million movie for half the price, and no one noticed." But there's a scene that made people talk a lot. In Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones does something very different. He holds onto the nose of a Nazi submarine as it moves across the water. What's wrong? Subs are always under the water. Their periscopes go down with them when they dive deep. But in the movie, Indy stays on the periscope for 72 hours without dying. The movie never says what it is. Fans couldn't help but wonder how he breathed. How come the team didn't see him? For years, people talked about this scene. The New York Times called it one of the biggest plot holes in movie history in 2008. Scientists thought that Indy would need the strongest grip ever to stay on while the sub was moving at full speed. After the fact, Spielberg said he knew it didn't make sense, but he was in a hurry to finish the movie. Fans tried to figure out what was going on. One idea was that the submarine never really went under the water. It turned out to be true. The U-boat stayed on the water the whole time, as seen in cut video. At first, there was a short scene that showed this. As seen, Indy used his whip to tie himself to the camera. This made sense after all. In the years before World War II, submarines mostly stayed above water to save fuel, since their engines couldn't last long underground. In the movie, the Nazi submarine was traveling more than 1,200 kilometers to a secret island. Most likely, it wouldn't have dove. This account was even the 1981 Raiders comic, which showed Indy losing his hat and whip on the trip. But Spielberg made it look silly when he filmed it. Harrison Ford found it hard to stay on a fake periscope, and people watching the tests laughed at how bad it looked. The scene was cut by Spielberg. It saved $250,000, but there was a huge hole in the story. Spielberg later said he felt bad about cutting the scene. Was the one thing he wished he had done differently? He said in a 1999 DVD introduction. After that, in 2012, a blurry VHS copy of the removed footage was posted online. More than 2.8 million people watched it on YouTube. After hearing all the buzz, Paramount put storyboards of the scene on a Blu-ray of Raiders. The joke was even used in the 2023 movie Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. In it, a young Indiana Jones says, "Don't ask about the submarine." Fans love the scene, even though it doesn't make sense in the end. It's one of the things that makes Indiana Jones cool. Harrison Ford defended it by saying, "The audience wants to believe he can't be hurt. Why add math to it?" That wasn't the only scene, though. There was a scene in 1984's Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom that people would never forget. Mola Ram, the leader of a strange cult, seems to use supernatural skills to remove a man's heart as part of a shocking ritual. The victim, who is still living, is lowered into a fiery pit while fans chant around them. That scene was very intense and different from anything else people had seen in an action movie. At the time, the special effects were very new. The directors used a rubber chess piece and flipped the video to make it look like the wound healed itself magically. But some TV versions took out the heart totally because it was so scary. This made Mola Ram's actions look more like a strange ritual than anything violent. Behind the scenes, the actor who played the victim was lowered over a real fire. How people felt about this scene had a big impact on how movies were rated forever. Parents and reviewers both said the movie was too intense for kids, but not so intense that it should have been rated R for adults only. Because of this, Hollywood made a whole new category called PG-13. A darker plot about child labor was also added to the movie, which is not often seen in big action movies. In the story, some kids are taken away from their scary stones. Scenes with young actors in dark tunnels showed them struggling because the cult boss told them to. Some people thought the movie was too much like real life, even though it was supposed to be a dream. In the 1800s, British officials said that an Indian secret group was doing bad things. However, the movie made this into a dramatic, made-up story that was much harder. Some reviewers thought that the story played with the pain of children too lightly, making it seem like just another problem for Indiana Jones to get through. Short rounds were shown during a very stressful moment. The group members are being mean to Indy's young sidekick as he tries to get away. Because of scenes like this and the general intensity of the movie, some countries didn't let it be shown. The Indian government even banned it, because they thought it gave a false and overblown picture of their culture. The dinner scene at Pankot Palace was another one that made people look twice. Indiana Jones and his friends are given a strange meal with things like monkey brains as fixings. Even though these foods had nothing to do with Indian food, the scene made it seem like a strange and foreign thing to do. After many years, Spielberg stated that these ideas were based on old myths and not on real events. Hindu groups were also angry about how a famous religious person was portrayed in the movie. In the story, the group worships Kali, who is usually thought of as a guardian goddess. But this group is shown to be dangerous and violent in the movie, which many people didn't like. Even the actor who played Mola Ram, Amrish Puri, had doubts about taking on the part. Spielberg had to tell him that it was all made up before he agreed. Because of how heated the argument got, the filmmakers had to change their plans to shoot. They didn't film in India. Instead, they built sets in Sri Lanka to finish the movie. Some people still argue about whether Temple of Doom was a brave artistic choice or an inaccurate portrayal of history and society decades after it came out. When Spielberg thought about it, Temple of Doom was the Indiana Jones movie he didn't like as much. He said that the darker tone of the movie came from a rough time in his life, like when he got divorced. He also thought that George Lucas, who helped write the story, was having a bad mood while writing the script. Later, Spielberg said he felt bad about some of the racial stereotypes in the movie. However, he supported the movie's intense parts by saying that adventure stories need a strong bad guy. He also said that the group in the movie wasn't meant to be based on real events, Indiana Jones to fight. He also flew through the air during the Raiders of the Lost Ark fight, which was meant to be a big, exciting scene. Jones wasn't going to pull out a gun and shoot them right away. He was supposed to fight a master swordsman in a long, exciting battle that would last almost 10 minutes. His whip, the sword, and even things in the market like hanging meat were all things he used to protect himself. The man with the sword wasn't just a random bad guy. In the story, he was really working for the Nazis and trying to keep Indiana Jones from finding Marion. Terry Richards, the actor Spielberg trained for weeks for the fight, learning hard moves like a 10-hit combo that was meant to make Indiana Jones look totally outclassed. Spielberg wanted it to feel like an old-school action movie, so he added some humor and danger. Then everything changed. Tunisia was very rough. The heat was too much to bear, and it was hard to shoot. Harrison Ford got really sick. He got diarrhea from drinking bad water, which made him thirsty, weak, and need to go to the bathroom all the time. The fight, Ford could only stand for 10 minutes at a time. Spielberg did not want to alter anything. The company had already spent $150,000 getting ready for this fight, but Ford was worn out. He looked at Spielberg and said, "Why don't we just shoot the guy?" That joke changed the history of movies. They made two versions, one with the whole fight and one where Indiana Jones only pulls out his gun and shoots the other guy. Spielberg saw both and got the characters just right. He didn't waste time on pointless fights. He knew a lot. He did anything to stay alive. It also saved 3 full days of shooting time and $250,000 in cost thanks to the new scene. Ford wasn't the only one in Tunisia who was hurt. Almost 80% of the cast and crew got sick. Douglas Slocum, who shot the movie, was even working while hooked up to an 4. Even so, they finished the movie, and that quick gunshot is now one of the most famous scenes in the history of action movies. Some of the first fight was shot before Spielberg decided not to use it. Behind-the-scenes video shows Indy swinging from a market stand, Terry Richards doing a backflip to avoid the whip, and a funny scene where the swordsman cuts through a butcher's meat by accident, which makes the butcher bow in thanks. There's still parts of the fight that were not used in the movie. 1. Included a version where Indy takes the swordsman's weapons away instead of killing him. On the Raiders Blu-ray from 2012, there was some practice video of Ford and Richards practicing the fight. For years, fans have been crazy about this cutscene. Someone sold a VHS of the practice footage on eBay in 1999 for $500. 12,000 fans signed a letter in 2003 calling for a movie version with the whole fight. Came out, a short clip of the scene that was cut got over 2 million views in just 1 week. As of 2023, AI had cleaned up the old footage, and people were arguing again whether Spielberg made the right choice. Some fans even think that Lucasfilm threw away the footage so that it wouldn't affect the later movies, which had more important whip fights than this one. Also, there's a scene in Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull that shocked fans to the core. Being hidden in a fridge. When the bomb goes off, the fridge is thrown through the air and flies more than a mile before it hits the ground. Indy crawls out without any problems. The scene was over in about 2.5 minutes, but people talked about it for years. What people saw made them doubt themselves. They said it was silly, not possible. It made Indiana Jones seem more like a cartoon than the hero they love. It even made a new frame by destroying the fridge. In the same way that jumping the shark became a way to, people use nuking the fridge to talk about when a show or movie gets worse. It also works for franchises that go too far and lose their magic. Most people don't know that the fridge idea came from the movie Back to the Future. Marty McFly was going to use a nuclear-powered fridge at a Nevada test site to go back in time in an early 1984 script. He would have lived through a nuclear blast by hiding inside it, just like Indiana Jones. But Spielberg, chose not to go with the idea. He thought that kids might try to get into fridges and get stuck. After many years, when he was making Indiana Jones 4, he remembered the idea and chose to use it. The scene in the fridge didn't change much, but the setting did. There are even old storyboards from Back to the Future that show how much the two versions were alike. But as soon as Indiana Jones 4 came out, experts quickly showed that the scene was not doable. Scientists who study nuclear physics looked into it and found several ways Indy could have died. First, the explosion would have thrown the fridge at almost 800 miles per hour. When it hit him, it would have crushed him and applied over 450 Gs of force, which is enough to melt his innards. The radiation would have killed him even if he had made it through that. Fans were very angry. Online, nuking the fridge was already a big deal just 2 days after the movie came out. Some said it was like Star Wars Jar Binks, and that it was one of the worst additions to a popular cast. People were let down by the movie, even though it made $790 million. After many years, Spielberg said he felt bad about the scene. He said, "I take full responsibility. In 2011, Ford told me that no one would buy this, but I still pushed it." He didn't mind at first when Nuke the Fridge turned into a joke, but he later saw that it was bad for the Indiana Jones movies. But Lucas refused to say that he was wrong. He even said he had science proof that the scene could happen that was 6 inches thick. But scientists thought it was silly and laughed it off. Curve that would have told us something important about it. In the movie, Indy and Sala go to Cairo to see Imam, but some of what they say was cut out. Imam first read a message from the staff of Ra's headgear that said, "You will die if you touch the Ark. You will die if you look at the Ark when it opens." This was shot, but it was cut out so the movie would go faster. That meant a big question was not solved. How did Doctor Strange know when to close his eyes? You've already been warned. Also, a funny scene with Sulla was cut from a movie and never showed up. His job was to help Indy get out of the map room by lowering a rope, but he forgot how to do it. He had to quickly think. He stole bed sheets and a Nazi flag to use as a rope in the end. He even spilled hot tea on a young German soldier by mistake during one take. John Rhys Davies, who played Sulla, made up some lines as he went along. Karen Allen and Frank Marshall, the manager, couldn't stop laughing at how funny he was. Spielberg cut the scene, though, because it didn't fit with the movie's serious tone. In the end, Rhys Davies said it was the funniest thing she had ever done, even though some of these scenes were cut. Still, Raiders of the Lost Ark is one of the best action movies ever made. To make the faces melt at the end look real, 17,000 watts of light and 12 tons of clay were used. The scary flying ghosts were drawn by hand and put on real dancers to make them move in a scary way. It cost more than $1.2 million to make the whole thing, which was a lot of money in 1981. Raiders of the Lost Ark wasn't just another action movie when it came out in 1981. It changed the movies. It made history interesting. The world got a hero who wasn't perfect, but never gave up. People still love it after more than 40 years. Real archaeologists were influenced by the Indiana Jones movies, and they set the bar for adventure movies. Harrison Ford was best known for his role as Han Solo in Star Wars before he played Indiana Jones. Things changed after Raiders, though. A huge movie star all over the world, he became. Mark Hamill and Carrie Fisher, his co-stars in Star Wars, had a hard time getting big parts, but Harrison Ford kept getting them. He played lead roles in Blade Runner, The Fugitive, and Air Force One. People always thought of him as Indiana Jones, though, no matter how many movies he made. The things that made him stand out were his charm, toughness, and the way he got back up after being knocked down. A big deal was also made by Karen Allen, who played Marion Ravenwood. Women in action movies didn't have much to do before Raiders, but Marion was different. She wasn't afraid of anyone, not even Indy. She was smart and strong. She set a standard for action women to follow. Allen worked in theater more often, but she still kept in touch with Indiana Jones. She came back in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull and Dial of Destiny, which showed how much fans still loved her. A lot of other players in the show also did well. In The Lord of the Rings, John Rhys-Davies, who played Sala, became even more well-known. It became famous for Paul Freeman to play smart and likable bad guys like Bellic. Alfred Molina had a small part in Raiders and then played Dr. Octopus in Spider-Man. Man 2, after many years, even Ke Huy Quan, who played Short Round in Temple of Doom, made a big comeback and won an Oscar for everything. One thing that Indiana Jones did, though, was change the lives of lots of people. People saw events differently after that. After the movie Raiders, more students became interested in digging. There was more interest at the University of Chicago and other schools. However, real archaeologists don't have to avoid booby traps and big rocks like Indiana Jones did. He just made their job look interesting. History and adventure started to be used in the same way in TV shows and films to make learning about the past feel just as exciting. The way Indy looked also became well-known. His outfit, including the fedora, leather jacket, and whip, screamed excitement. Deborah and Dolman, who made his clothes, based them on real travelers from the 1930s. Soon, other movies began to use the same plot. Indiana Jones style was used in movies like The Mummy, Jumanji, and even video games like Uncharted. His glasses and tweed suit, which made him look like a professor, added to his charm and showed that he was both smart and adventurous. But Indiana Jones had the most important effect on action flicks. It wasn't this fast, exciting, or creative in action movies before Raiders. Things that are now common in Hollywood were first seen in the Indiana Jones movies. National was inspired by the idea of solving ancient secrets. He made mistakes, got tired, and scared, but he paved the way for characters like John McClane in Die Hard. Assassin's Creed and other games have been affected by the way Indiana Jones used real places like Nepal and Venice. The movies also changed the way movies are made. Some of the best action scenes ever are still the minecart scene in Temple of Doom and the giant rock chase in Raiders. Due to the fact that they were made without CGI, they seemed very real. John Williams' theme music became as well known as Star Wars and Jaws, and J.J. Abrams and other directors were inspired by Steven Spielberg's work. Abrams and James Mangold, who later directed Dial of Destiny. Of course, the show wasn't perfect all the time. People said that Temple of Doom used stereotypes to make Indian society look bad. The alien plot in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull upset fans because it didn't fit with the rest of the story. But even these movies were talked about when people talked about Indiana Jones. Nothing could be done about them, whether you like them or not. We still see Indiana Jones in movies and TV shows today. The figure lives on in new video games like Indiana Jones and The Great Circle. People still buy Lego sets and rides with Indy themes. There's a real term in history for this effect, too. It talks about how pop culture can make history interesting to new generations. Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny was the last book in the series when it came out in 2023. Harrison Ford, who is 80 years old now, came back for one last adventure. The movie looked at getting old, leaving a memory, and what happens when a hero's time is up. We said goodbye with sadness. His journey may be over, but his influence lives on. The Indiana Jones movies have been more than just movies for more than 40 years. It kicked off lives. It made studying history fun. It changed action movies for good. After all these years, it gave the world a hero who still shows us that the best adventures aren't just about finding wealth. They're about having courage, being interested, and not letting up. He said himself, "Honey, it's not the years. It's the distance. It doesn't matter how much time goes by. The end is close." The adventure never really ends.